What if I told you that a simple hole in the ground saved lives more effectively than the most modern central heating system? The first settlers quickly realized that the thin walls of their wooden huts could not protect them from the biting winds of the Great Plains. When temperatures dropped to deadly levels, the space underground became the only island of warmth and stability. This forgotten engineering masterpiece worked without electricity, coal, or firewood, using only the laws of physics, which we have safely forgotten today. The dugout and root cellar were not just a storage place for food, but a complex thermodynamic device that allowed people to survive the hell of ice storms. Watch the video to the end, and you will learn how simple Earth physics surpasses 21st century technology and why modern basements are doomed to failure. I will reveal the best-kept secret that allowed these structures to function for decades without a single failure. Most people imagine a root cellar as an airtight, musty box buried deep in the ground for storing potatoes. However, the real effectiveness of these shelters lay not in their airtightness, but in their ability to breathe constantly and slowly. If the cellar were completely closed, the food inside would rot in a matter of weeks due to the gas it emitted. Frontier builders intuitively understood the principles of aerodynamics, creating a natural draft system without fans. They installed two pipes, one near the floor and the other near the ceiling, to force air to circulate. Cold, fresh air, being heavier, descended down the supply pipe, displacing stagnant warm air. This flow washed over the stored produce, removing excess moisture and ethylene, which accelerates ripening and decay. The heated air, saturated with vapors, naturally rose to the exhaust pipe and left the room. Without this constant, barely noticeable movement of air, the cellar would have turned into a damp grave for the harvest. Regulating this flow was a real art, requiring attention to changes in the weather outside. During severe frosts, the openings were covered with straw or rags to prevent the contents from freezing. On warm days, they were opened wide at night to store the cold for future use, storing it in the earthen walls. This system worked around the clock, maintaining the perfect balance of temperature and freshness without human intervention. Unlike wood or stone, the walls of the cellar had tremendous thermal inertia. They slowly released heat in winter and just as slowly accumulated coolness in summer, smoothing out sharp temperature fluctuations. The soil around the cellar acted as a giant battery that could not be discharged instantly. It is precisely this principle of using the mass of the earth to stabilize the climate that is completely ignored in construction today. We try to fight nature with powerful heaters instead of using its inertia. The pioneers did not fight the climate. They integrated themselves into it, using the earth as an ally. Their understanding of air currents was based on observation, not physics textbooks. Errors in ventilation calculations cost settlers a whole year of starvation due to rotten supplies. Too strong a draft dried out vegetables, turning them into shriveled mummies. Too weak a draft led to mold and rot, destroying tons of food. The balance was found through trial and error, with knowledge being passed from neighbor to neighbor. Surprisingly, many modern green technologies merely replicate what was standard practice 150 years ago. We invent complex air recuperators, even though simple pressure differential physics works for free. The root cellar was a living organism that breathed in cold and breathed out heat. This structure required an understanding of nature, not brute force or fuel. Each element of the structure had its own specific purpose, from the height of the pipe to the material of the damper. Even the orientation of the pipes relative to the prevailing winds was taken into account during construction. The wind, passing over the upper pipe, created an area of low pressure, literally sucking out the stale air. This increased the draft even on days when the temperature difference was minimal. This ingenious simplicity allowed food to be kept fresh until the next harvest. Have you ever wondered why it is always easier to breathe in old houses than in modern concrete boxes? Write in the comments what you think about this natural ventilation system. Are you ready to learn the truth about why the magic number 6 was a matter of life and death? The depth to which settlers buried their storage facilities was not chosen at random or on a whim by the builder. There was an invisible boundary that had to be crossed in order to reach the zone of temperature stability. This boundary is called the frost line, and it varies depending on the region. Shutterstock. If the pit was not dug deep enough, the winter frost would penetrate the soil and destroy all the supplies. Frozen ground becomes as hard as rock and ceases to act as an insulator, turning into a conductor of cold. On the other hand, a hole that is too deep requires a tremendous amount of effort and reinforcement to prevent the walls from collapsing. Pioneers found the golden mean through trial and error, where the ground temperature remained constant throughout the year. At a depth of about 2 to 3 meters, the soil temperature stabilizes at around 10 to 12 degrees Celsius. This geothermal heat comes from the bowels of the planet and is preserved thanks to the insulating properties of the upper layers of soil. In winter, this temperature feels warm, and in summer, it is refreshingly cool. It was this layer that builders sought to reach when creating their underground rooms. To reach this depth, tons of heavy, compacted earth had to be shoveled by hand. Pickaxes and shovels were the only tools available to most settlers in the early stages. Working in a cramped excavation pit was exhausting and dangerous due to the risk of landslides, but the result was worth every hour of labor and every drop of sweat. The cellar walls, located below the frost line, never froze over, even in the most severe blizzards. They radiated a gentle warmth that prevented water from freezing and made potatoes sweet. It was natural-free and endless heating, powered by the energy of the planet itself. Unlike a stove, which cools down by morning, the earth maintained a constant temperature. The entrance to such a cellar was usually through a sloping tunnel or staircase with several doors. The space between the doors created an airlock that prevented cold air from entering. This vestibule space was a critical element in maintaining the microclimate. Upon opening the outer door, a person would enter the airlock, close it, and only then open the inner door. The ceiling of the cellar also had to be below the freezing level or very well insulated from above. Often an additional mound of earth was piled on top of the cellar to increase the thickness of the protective layer. This artificial mound became a characteristic feature of the landscape on many farms. The grass growing on this mound held the soil together with its roots, providing additional protection. Inside this underground kingdom, it was always autumn, regardless of what was happening on the surface. In summer, when the heat outside reached 40 degrees, butter and milk could be stored in the cellar. In winter, when blizzards raged, it was warm enough here to wait out the bad weather. It was a refuge that existed outside of time and seasons. Understanding the properties of the soil and knowing how to use its inertia was the key to survival on the frontier. Modern basements often ignore this principle, relying on insulation materials rather than the mass of the earth. We cut ourselves off from the natural warmth of the earth with layers of foam and concrete. The old masters knew that the earth was not an enemy to be isolated from, but a source of energy. But depth provided more than just temperature stability. It provided something more. In the next chapter, you will learn how this dark pit became the only salvation from the most destructive force of nature. What I am about to show you will make you look at the concept of safety in the wilderness in a new way. For people living on the endless plains, the sky often became a source of mortal danger. Tornadoes, or as they were then called, cyclones, came without warning, like beasts breaking loose from their chains. They could wipe a wooden hut off the face of the earth in seconds, scatter wagons, uproot trees, and turn a family's entire property into splinters. The thin line between life and death ran through the door of a small earthen shelter. At such moments, a deep, reinforced cellar became the only place on the entire plain where one could survive. When the horizon turned black, the air changed its smell, becoming heavy and metallic, and filled with an ominous rumble that echoed in the chest. The family descended underground without a word. People knew that if they delayed even for a minute, the way out would be cut off. Here, beneath the thick layer of soil and turf, the roar of the wind turned into a dull vibration, as if a giant were slowly dragging mountains right over their heads. The walls of the cellar, made of compacted earth and clay and lined with wooden beams, muffled the sounds of destruction happening above, creating the illusion of a separate world. It was not just a physical shelter, but a psychological capsule of sensory deprivation, in which a person seemed to fall out of reality, finding a strange, primitive calm. In a cramped space lit only by the dim light of an oil lamp or a tiny candle, people felt protected by the very matter of the earth. The smell of damp soil, usually associated with a grave, at such moments turned into the smell of life and salvation. The walls breathed coolness, but there was no threat in that breath. The thick beams of the ceiling above inspired confidence with their massiveness and reliability. They were selected from the best logs, sometimes brought from dozens of miles away, to ensure that no wind could tear off the roof, which was essentially part of the hill. The cellar served not only as a shield from storms, but also as a refuge from the unbearable summer heat, which could drive people mad, dehydrate animals, and destroy the nervous system. When the sun heated the prairie to the point of becoming a frying pan, and the air became so dry that the skin on your hands cracked, the coolness of the underground gave the body a respite. Here, one could take a break from the constant wind that blows almost nonstop on the plains, rustling the grass, flapping clothes, and exhausting people with a sound from which there is no escape. The silence of the underground room was a rare luxury in a world full of untamed elements. This room became a temporary safe for the family's most valuable possessions: land deeds, the family Bible, seeds for the future harvest, rare tools. Everything was stored here in case of danger. If the house burned down from lightning or was destroyed by the wind, the cellar often remained untouched, like the last bastion of civilization amid the chaos. It allowed you to start all over again, even if the world above turned into a wasteland. In a sense, the cellar was the heart of the farm, more important than the house itself. The shelter's design provided protection not only from the wind, but also from the pressure changes that accompanied powerful cyclones. The massive door with an iron bolt was designed to withstand the suction force of a tornado, capable of tearing windows and doors from their frames. Ventilation holes were sometimes plugged with wet cloth or wooden plugs to prevent a sudden pressure surge inside. People sat in the dark, listening to the ground, which transmitted the tremors from falling trees and collapsing buildings. The vibrations made it possible to tell whether the storm was already nearby or still on the other side of the valley. The psychological comfort provided by such a shelter cannot be overestimated. Knowing that there was a place where the elements did not have power over people gave them confidence. It allowed settlers to make plans, cultivate the land, and raise children in places where common sense would dictate not to live at all. The cellar was an anchor that kept families in this harsh but promising land. People often spent long hours in such shelters, sometimes until morning. During this time, they did small tasks, told stories, prayed, or simply sat in silence, feeling each other's presence. Fear of the elements united relatives and neighbors, gathered shoulder to shoulder in a confined space. These were moments of extreme honesty, prayerful silence, and deep intimacy in the face of possible death. When they went outside after the storm, they often saw ruins, scattered boards, vanished sheds, overturned carts, strips of land as if licked by a giant hand. But they themselves remained unharmed. The cellar had once again proven its strength. Thus, the cellar's function went far beyond food storage. It was a temple of safety, built with their own hands from wood, earth, and fear of the sky. It gave hope when the world around them was literally falling apart. Don't forget to like this video. What if everything you've been taught about building floors is outdated and wrong? Modern people are accustomed to thinking that a floor should be hard, smooth, and preferably concrete. However, for a root cellar, a concrete floor would be a catastrophic mistake, leading to crop loss. Frontier builders knew that the best floor was the earth itself, preferably sandy or clay. Concrete acts as a powerful conductor of cold and moisture, but it cannot regulate them. An earthen floor has the unique ability to breathe along with the room. It absorbs excess moisture when the air is too humid and releases it back when it becomes dry. This natural hygrometer maintained humidity at an ideal level of about 90%. High humidity was critical for keeping root vegetables firm. In dry air, carrots and potatoes quickly lose moisture, becoming limp and tasteless. The earthen floor constantly fed moisture into the air, rising from the deep layers of the soil. This created a microclimate similar to the conditions inside the garden itself. The floor was often sprinkled with a layer of clean river sand, which was easy to replace. The sand served as excellent drainage in case of minor flooding. Dirty or moldy sand was simply raked out with a shovel and replaced with new sand to maintain hygiene. It was a simple and ingenious solution to the problem of sanitation. Sometimes they used compacted clay, which over time became as hard as stone. A clay floor was easier to sweep and produced less dust than a simple earthen floor. But even clay retained the vapor permeability necessary for the proper functioning of the cellar. A concrete screed would have completely blocked this vital channel of communication with the subsoil. In addition, earthen floors allowed some vegetables to be buried directly in the ground for better preservation. Celery or cabbage roots were buried in moist sand, and they continued to live. The plants thought they were still in the garden and remained fresh for months. Such a trick would have been impossible on concrete. The lack of waterproofing from below also allowed geothermal heat to be used as efficiently as possible. The heat from the ground rose unhindered, warming the air in the room. Any layer of insulation or concrete would have been a barrier to this life-saving heat. The cellar was literally an extension of the Earth's crust. Modern basements suffer from dampness precisely because they try to fight the moisture in the ground rather than manage it. Sealed concrete boxes accumulate condensation on cold walls, creating ideal conditions for mold. The old cellar with its earthen floor never sweated because the entire system was permeable. Moisture was evenly distributed throughout the porous material of the walls and floor. There was no dew point on the surface because the surface was hygroscopic. This is the physics of materials that we have lost in our pursuit of sterility in European-style renovations. The simplicity of the earthen floor was the result of centuries of experience, not poverty. However, simply creating the right climate was not enough to preserve food. Ready to learn the secret that saved thousands of tons of food from turning into rotten mush? Inside the cellar, there was a strict order that might have seemed chaotic to the uninitiated. Vegetables were not simply piled up on the floor. That would have been a sure way to destroy the entire stock. Each type of product required its own special approach, its own bed in its own place in the storage hierarchy. Knowledge of vegetable compatibility was as important as the ability to read tracks. Potatoes, the main source of calories, required complete darkness. Otherwise, they would start to turn green and become poisonous. They were stored in special boxes with ventilation slits raised above the floor. Potatoes were never allowed to touch the damp outer wall. Air had to circulate around the tubers on all sides to prevent them from rotting. Carrots and beets were often stored sprinkled with damp sand or sawdust. This layer isolated each root vegetable from the others, preventing the spread of rot. If one vegetable began to spoil, the sand blocked contact with its neighbors, saving the rest of the box. In addition, the sand retained moisture inside the vegetable, keeping it crisp until spring. Special attention was paid to apples, which release large amounts of ethylene, a gas that accelerates ripening. If apples were placed next to potatoes, the potatoes would start to sprout prematurely. Therefore, fruit was stored as close as possible to the exhaust ventilation. It was placed on the top shelves so that the gas would immediately escape into the pipe. Cabbage was often hung by its stalks from the ceiling beams, with its roots facing upwards. In this position, it did not touch any surfaces, was well ventilated, and did not rot for a long time. The outer leaves dried out, turning into parchment, but inside the head remained juicy and white. It looked strange, like green chandeliers, but it worked flawlessly. Onions and garlic did not like the dampness of the cellar at all, so they were stored in the driest and coolest corners or in the attic. If they were brought downstairs, it was only after being braided into plaits and hung up. This ensured maximum air circulation around each bulb. The damp floor was their main enemy. Pumpkins and squash required warmer conditions and were placed on the highest shelves. This is where the warmest air gathered, rising from the ground in the breathing vegetables. Their thick skin allowed them to be stored for a long time, but only if it was dry and relatively warm. Regular sorting of supplies was a mandatory ritual for every member of the family. Once a week, it was necessary to go down and inspect the vegetables for signs of rot. One rotten apple spoils the whole barrel is not just a saying, but a strict instruction for survival. Spoiled vegetables were immediately removed and fed to livestock. Straw was also used as a universal packaging material and insulation. A layer of straw was used to cover piles of potatoes during particularly severe frosts. It allowed the vegetables to breathe but retain the heat they emitted during their life cycle. Yes, vegetables also emit heat, and in a confined space, this mattered. It was a complex logistical system where every cubic centimeter of space was used wisely. A mistaken placement could lead to food loss, which in winter meant starvation. Knowing the character of each vegetable was part of the basic education of frontier children.
The settler stands at the edge of a thatched roof. Straw, grass, and reeds have been carefully gathered to...
Guess which roofing material was the most reliable, free, and renewable? When you don't have access to tiles, slate, or even good boards, you look down at your feet. This is exactly what settlers did when they had to build houses and cellars in conditions where there were almost no trees. Sod, a dense layer of earth intertwined with the roots of steppe grasses, was literally a gift from nature. It lay everywhere, was easy to cut and carry, and most importantly, it was constantly being renewed. This made it an ideal roofing material that lasted for years and did not require complex maintenance. Sod, the top layer of soil, densely intertwined with the roots of steppe grasses, became the ideal roofing material. Its structure is so dense that it is practically impossible to separate the layer from the ground without special tools. But once the cutting technique was mastered, it became an amazingly durable building resource, comparable in functionality to ordinary brick. It was especially valued for its ability to retain moisture and shape, not crack in the sun and not deform in the cold. Most importantly, the roof of the cellar was literally alive, continuing to grow and change with the seasons. This made it not only useful but also a beautiful part of the landscape. The turf laying technique resembled bricklaying, except that grass was used instead of clay. The turf layers were cut into rectangles of the same size so that they could be laid in rows. Each new row was laid with an offset so that the roof would not spread under the weight of the earth. Strong wooden beams supported this heavy decking, helping to distribute the weight evenly. The roots of the plants created a reinforcing mesh that prevented the soil from crumbling and strengthened the structure. Over time, the layers grew together into a monolithic mass, incredibly strong and heavy. Over time, these layers became like a single block of earth, as if they had formed naturally. This special property made such roofs almost invulnerable to strong winds and heavy rains. Even if the outer layer of grass began to dry out, the inner roots continued to hold the structure together. Such a roof could withstand both prolonged rains and droughts, which was important for steppe regions. Settlers appreciated the fact that the roof did not require regular repairs, and minor damage was overgrown on its own. That is why the technology quickly became widespread among those who built cellars on open plains. Such a roof had phenomenal thermal insulation properties. The earth itself is a poor conductor of heat, and the air entangled in the roots of the grass enhanced the effect. Thanks to this, the room remained cool in summer, even when it was sweltering outside. In summer, the sun heated the grass on the roof, but the heat did not penetrate through half a meter of earth, forming a natural barrier. In winter, the heat from the cellar could not escape through this layered pie, remaining inside. As a result, the temperature in the room remained almost unchanged, which was a huge advantage for long-term food storage. For people living in a harsh continental climate, such stability was a real salvation. Inside the cellar, the temperature remained almost the same in January as in July. This allowed vegetables, meat, and dairy products to be stored much longer than in ordinary farm pits. Even during periods of drought or prolonged frost, the cellar continued to fulfill its role, requiring virtually no human intervention. No other material available in those years gave similar results with such simplicity of construction. That is why turf roofs became the standard solution for cellars, dugouts, and small buildings. The most amazing insulator, however, was the snow that accumulated on the roof. Its loose structure, filled with air, created an additional protective layer. Settlers never cleared snow from the cellar roof. On the contrary, they piled it up there as much as possible, realizing that this only improved thermal insulation. Snow, consisting mainly of air, works like a down blanket, trapping heat inside. Under a thick snowdrift, the temperature of the roof always remained around zero, even when the outside air froze to -40. Such natural insulation was especially valuable in winter, when food supplies were critically important. In winter, the cellar became one of the most reliable parts of the farm thanks to this layer of snow. Even when houses froze and doors had to be insulated additionally, the cellar remained stable and protected. This allowed families to preserve their harvest of potatoes, carrots, and other root vegetables until spring. In addition, snowdrifts protected the roof from sudden temperature changes that could damage the structure of the turf. With the snow left untouched, the roof lasted longer and was more resistant to damage. Therefore, the attitude towards snow on the roof was completely different from that towards snow on the road or in the yard. It was not an enemy, but an ally. But even the best roof would not have saved the cellar if the location had been chosen incorrectly. In the next chapter, you will learn how one mistake in geography could have ruined all the hard work. Choosing a location for a cellar was like strategic planning for a military operation. You couldn't just point your finger at the ground and start digging wherever it was convenient. Settlers carefully studied the terrain, water flow, and sun exposure on their land. A mistake at this stage was irreparable and would lead to flooding or freezing of the storage facility. The ideal location was considered to be a hillside facing north or northeast. The northern slope receives the least amount of sunlight, which is critical for keeping the cellar cool in summer. The ground here warms up more slowly and stays cold longer, helping the cellar to function effectively. The south slope, on the other hand, heated up too much, turning the cellar into an oven. Cutting into the hill saved energy on earthworks and simplified the construction of the entrance. Instead of digging a deep pit and building a staircase down, it was possible to make the entrance horizontal. This made it easier to carry heavy sacks of potatoes and barrels of pickles. In addition, water drainage on the slope worked naturally. Water is the main enemy of any underground structure, so lowlands and ravines were avoided at all costs. Spring floods or heavy rains could turn a cellar into a pool of dirty slush in an hour. Builders looked for places with low groundwater levels so that the floor would always remain dry. If the groundwater was close, they had to build the cellar half above ground and cover it with soil from above. Soil type also played a decisive role in choosing a location. Sandy soils are easy to dig and drain well, but their walls are prone to collapse and require reinforcement. Clay soils hold their shape well, but do not drain well, creating a risk of dampness. Loam was ideal, a happy medium, strong and moderately permeable. The location relative to the house was also important. The cellar had to be close enough to run to in winter, but not too close, so as not to damage the foundation of the residential building during excavation work. It was usually built 10 to 15 meters from the kitchen door. This created a convenient working triangle for the hostess. The trees around the cellar could be both friends and enemies. On the one hand, the shade from the crown helped keep the ground cool in summer. On the other hand, powerful roots could break through the walls of the cellar or destroy the waterproofing of the roof. Therefore, they tried to choose a place under young trees or shrubs, avoiding old giants. They also took into account the wind rose so that the entrance door would not be directly exposed to winter blizzards. Snow drifts in front of the door could block access to food at the most inopportune moment. They tried to orient the entrance so that the wind would blow the snow away rather than accumulate it. Observing where the snow melted first in spring and where the water stood the longest provided clues. Nature itself marked the best and worst places for construction. One only needed to be able to read these signs written in the language of the landscape. Geography determined the fate of a building even before the first shovel hit the ground. It was the art of harmoniously integrating human needs into the existing terrain. Inside a properly constructed cellar, different temperature zones formed, invisible to the eye. Warm air, being lighter, always rose to the ceiling, creating a smooth temperature gradient. This order was a natural consequence of physics and did not depend on the wishes of the owner. The difference between the floor and the ceiling could be several degrees, which was critical for storing vegetables. Even a small change affected the taste, shelf life, and quality. Settlers observed these patterns for years and learned to use them to their maximum effect. These hidden temperature layers determined how the space inside the cellar would be organized. People noticed that even if the door was left open for just a minute, warm air rose and cold air remained near the floor. Therefore, the rearrangement of products was carried out with caution and depending on the season. In winter, when the outside temperature dropped too low, the cellar was closed especially tightly. In summer, on the contrary, they tried not to bring in excess heat. This is how a unique system was formed based on observation of nature and human practice. Potatoes were placed in the lowest, coldest area, directly on the earthen floor. They needed a temperature of about 3 or 4 degrees Celsius to remain in a state of ideal dormancy. If it got warmer, they began to sprout and lost their quality. If it got colder, the potatoes became sweet due to changes in the starch. The floor remained the most stable place, protected from accidental warm air currents from above. Therefore, this zone was considered the main one for the main winter supply. In addition, condensation formed less often on the earthen floor, which was important for potatoes. Moisture could spoil the tubers faster than the wrong temperature. The settlers carefully ensured that the floor remained dry and level, sometimes adding fresh soil. In the corners, where the cold lasted the longest, the largest tubers were laid out so that they would last until spring. In this way, even small cellars were turned into reliable storage facilities where every detail mattered. This area was the basis of the family's entire food security. Just above, on the lower shelves, root vegetables were stored: turnips, rutabagas, carrots, and beets. They were less sensitive to temperature fluctuations than potatoes, but still required cool conditions. To preserve them longer, they were kept in boxes with sand, which absorbed excess moisture. These vegetables formed the basis of the winter diet, so access to them had to be convenient and quick. Settlers often checked the condition of the sand, changing it and relayering it as necessary. This ensured stable storage even during the harshest months. Root vegetables, unlike potatoes, could tolerate slightly higher temperatures but drier conditions. Therefore, the lower shelves were the ideal compromise between the damp floor and the warm upper tiers. The heaviest boxes were placed on these shelves so that they did not have to be moved too often. Thanks to the sand, the carrots did not wilt and the beets did not dry out, even at the end of winter. Children often helped sort the vegetables, learning to understand which fruits should be eaten first. This maintained order, which was important for survival. The middle tier was occupied by barrels of sauerkraut, pickled cucumbers, and pickled apples. These products were much more resistant to temperature changes. Fermentation made them alive and self-regulating, so they only needed moderate cooling. The brine acted as a temperature buffer, retaining cold or heat longer than air. The massive oak barrels themselves were excellent cold accumulators. They maintained a constant temperature for a long time, even if there were changes in the cellar. This level was used to store the most frequently eaten foods, so it was convenient in terms of height. The lids of the barrels were checked regularly to prevent air or dirt from entering. Sometimes a small weight was placed on top to ensure that the brine completely covered the vegetables. This kept the sauerkraut crisp and prevented the cucumbers from becoming soft. The middle tier was the heart of the cellar, a place of constant movement. Supplies were taken from here almost daily. The upper shelves, where the air was warmest and driest, were intended for dried herbs, onions, and seeds. These products were most susceptible to moisture and quickly spoiled in damp conditions. Here the humidity was lower, which prevented mold and rot. Pumpkins also loved this warm corner of the cellar, as they felt comfortable at 10 degrees. Their hard skin helped to keep the flesh fresh and sweet for a long time. Therefore, pumpkins often occupied the top tier among dry products. These shelves saved space, as such products were light and could be stacked in several rows. Onions were hung in braids so that they could be better ventilated and did not come into contact with damp surfaces. Dried herbs were tied into bunches and laid out so that air could circulate freely between them. Seeds were stored in cloth bags, protected from small rodents. This created the warmest and driest area, where everything remained usable until the next harvest. Jars of jam and compote, which appeared later, were placed on well-ventilated shelves. Glass jars could fog up if condensation gathered around them. Therefore, care was taken to ensure that the lids did not rust, as rust could spoil both the jar itself and its contents. They were wiped with grease or wax to create a protective layer. This treatment was simple but very effective. Thanks to this, homemade preserves retained their taste until spring. The jars were placed in rows on these shelves so that it was easy to see what was inside and how much was left. Most often, jams were placed closer and compotes further away as they were opened less often. People knew how important it was to monitor the condition of the glass and handled it with care. Unlike wooden barrels, jars could not withstand shocks and sudden temperature changes. Therefore, places where air circulated particularly well were chosen for them. This way, glass preserves were stored safely and for a long time. A special place was reserved for storing milk and butter in the summer. These products spoiled the fastest and required the lowest possible temperature. They were placed in special niches in the floor or immersed in buckets of cold water. The water gradually evaporated, creating a natural cooling effect. This principle has been used since ancient times in different cultures. It resembled the work of old clay refrigerators, which also cooled products through evaporation. During the hottest months, these niches became the center of the entire cellar system. Butter remained solid for a long time in them, and milk did not sour as quickly. Sometimes food was placed in tightly closed jugs so that it would not absorb odors. People who lived far from rivers and wells especially appreciated this method of cooling. It was simple and did not depend on the weather, except in cases of extreme drought. Therefore, niches in the floor were an important part of any well-designed cellar. Modern basements built of concrete and waterproofing often become a headache for owners. We are used to thinking that new technologies are always better than old ones, but in this case, that is not true. The main problem with modern basements is their airtightness and wall material. Concrete is a cold, lifeless stone that cannot regulate the microclimate. Concrete has high thermal conductivity, which means it freezes quickly if it is not insulated from the outside. In old cellars, the walls were made of earth and were infinitely thick. They changed temperature gradually. A concrete wall acts as a cold bridge, instantly transferring the cold from outside to inside if there is no layer of foam plastic. The second problem is waterproofing. We wrap houses in plastic and bitumen, creating a thermos. In such a thermos, moisture has nowhere to go except to condense on the walls. An old cellar breathed through its entire surface, releasing steam into the ground. A modern basement requires forced electric ventilation to prevent mold growth. The lack of thermal inertia of the earth is another disadvantage of modern structures. If you turn off the heating in a modern house, the basement will cool down very quickly. A root cellar could maintain a positive temperature for weeks without any external heat. We have replaced the free energy of the earth with the expensive energy of gas and electricity. The chemical inertia of concrete also plays a role. Earthen floors contain microorganisms that suppress the growth of certain pathogens. In a sterile concrete bunker, any mold that is brought in grows instantly, unchallenged. We have created ideal conditions for fungus in our quest for perfect cleanliness. Modern basements are often too dry because of the central heating that runs through them. In dry air, vegetables wilt within a week. We have to install electric humidifiers, wasting energy on what the earth did for free. It's an absurd cycle of fighting the consequences of our own technology. The layout of modern houses often does not take into account the cardinal directions and wind rows. Basements are built where it is convenient to build a house, not where it is effective. Ignoring the landscape leads to drainage and flooding problems, which are solved with powerful pumps. Again, dependence on electricity. We have forgotten how to use passive systems, relying instead on active ones. An active system, pump, fan, heater, can break down. A passive system, gravity, heat capacity, capillary effect, works forever as long as the laws of physics exist. Old cellars were passive survival systems. Of course, no one is suggesting living in a dugout in the 21st century, but the principles behind their design could make our homes much more energy efficient. Instead, we build concrete boxes and spend fortunes on heating and dehumidifying them. The loss of this knowledge makes us vulnerable. We depend on the power switch, while the pioneers depended only on their wits and the ground beneath their feet. The history of frontier root cellars is not just a story about storing potatoes. It is a lesson in how to live in harmony with a harsh climate without trying to overcome it by force. The pioneers did not have the resources to fight nature, so they learned to use its forces to their advantage. This approach is called passive design, and it is more relevant today than ever. They used geothermal energy long before the term became fashionable. The stable temperature of the Earth is an endless resource that lies beneath our feet. Instead of burning fossil fuels, they simply connected to this giant battery. It was the cleanest and greenest energy in the world. They understood the importance of ventilation and air quality better than many modern architects. Their houses and cellars breathed, providing a healthy microclimate without air conditioning. We often lock ourselves in airtight plastic bags and then suffer from allergies and poor health. The use of local materials, turf, wood, stone, made their construction environmentally friendly and inexpensive. Disposing of such a cellar did not leave behind mountains of construction waste. It simply returned to the earth from which it was made. This is an example of the ideal life cycle of a building. Resistance to natural disasters was built into the very structure. Tornadoes, fires, frosts. The cellar could survive it all. Modern frame houses often collapse like houses of cards at the first serious test. The reliability of old methods has been proven by time and lives. Zoning and proper food storage teach us to treat resources with care. We are used to throwing food away because it has gone bad in the refrigerator. Our ancestors knew the value of every apple they grew and knew how to preserve it for months. This is a culture of consumption that we should remember. The psychological aspect of having a refuge is also important. The sense of security that came from being connected to the land helped people stay sane. In our unstable world, perhaps we also lack such an anchor, places of silence and stability. Frontier technologies were simple, but not primitive. Behind this simplicity lay a deep understanding of physical processes. Complexity does not always mean efficiency, and simplicity does not always mean backwardness. By studying the experiences of the past, we can find solutions to the problems of the future. Energy crises and climate change are forcing us to look for alternative ways forward, and sometimes the new is simply the well-forgotten old. Perhaps the ideal home of the future will combine modern comforts with the wisdom of the dugout, a hybrid of technology and nature. We have seen how a simple hole in the ground was the pinnacle of engineering thought of its time. It warmed, fed, and protected people who dared to challenge the wilderness. It was a structure that ingeniously combined biology, physics, and geology. Modern basements, for all their technological sophistication, often lose out to this ancient structure in terms of efficiency and reliability. We have learned to build faster and higher, but it seems we have forgotten how to build smarter. Do you think the principles of root cellar construction should be applied in modern private home architecture? Or is this a hopelessly outdated technology that belongs in a museum? Write your opinion in the comments. I would be very interested to read your point of view. Suggest topics for future videos. What else would you like to learn about the history of the Wild West? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on new historical insights.